resign, but not the ones in which you get promoted. And so, I don't know, did any of you guys notice that glaring deficiency this week?
Yes, I thought it was really problematic. We've really turned the fight to end discrimination on its head. As many people would have to admit, and I mean, there were real barriers for people of color, women, to get in these military academies. And then there was, affirmative steps to make sure that there were none of those barriers, whether it be from connections, whether it be from, the fact that you're related to someone, or you happen to, be born in one place as opposed to another. And the whole idea of diversity is to indicate that, hey, it benefits everyone to know different perspectives, whether it's, someone that's from Indiana, their perspective may be different from someone from Louisiana. And the whole idea of diversity is to have this educational process where students can learn from one another. And so what the Supreme Court did in its recent decision, it says that, hey, you cannot even consider diversity anymore. And now it's just really filtering down to the military academies. Now, what's interesting is that the Supreme Court basically made an exception for the military academies and said that, hey, this analysis as it relates to you can't use, a +1 factor in terms of admissions didn't apply to the military academies because, it went to military readiness. But now that this administration has come into office, they've extended that and said that, hey, no, it applies to military academies. So it's going to be very problematic in terms of not only the military academies but other institutions that watch and are guided by what these military academies are doing.
That's so absolutely true, Attorney Primes and Lee. And again, affirmative action and diversity, equity, inclusion were never intended for unqualified candidates to obtain jobs in corporate America or access to federal contracts. Those initiatives and standards were implemented so that qualified candidates could gain access to these opportunities who had historically been denied equal access. And so it's just a turning on its head. It's a weaponization of terms to accomplish a particular outcome. And Attorney Primes, you're absolutely right. When we look at the recent Supreme Court decision, it applied only in the case of higher education with respect to Harvard and the other college that was named in the suit. And the Justice Robert, I believe, said in that case that an applicant could include information on their application regarding their life experience. But we're seeing with respect to this administration and its executive orders, and back to your point, Attorney Primes, that the military was exempted from that as well for the reason that you suggested. But we're seeing such outrageous things, such as Naval Academy students not being able to gain access to Maya Angelou's book this week. Did you hear about that, Attorney Lee? I mean, just outrageous. It's not like any student is demanded to read the book, but having a diverse set of books, again, benefits everybody. So these things just don't make any sense at all. And I always like to talk about solutions as well. And one of the solutions to our listening audience, or one of the things that you can be thinking about, is actually tracking these executive orders, many of which, keep in mind, are downright illegal. And we're using our platform to call that out. Many of these executive orders are unconstitutional. The Congressional Black Caucus Foundation has a tracker of these executive orders. And so I am encouraging everyone to access the tracker and familiarize yourself with these executive orders so that we can work collectively in our communities to speak out against these illegal actions.
Counselor, there's something very important that I read this week. Back in the 1930s, before Hitler became really powerful, what they did is currently they're doing the same playbook. If you were a racist, what you would do is say everyone else is being racist. And so you mask your own racism by accusing someone else. So what they're doing is repeating what led to the Nazi German experience back in the 40s. So in the United States of America, racist people are calling non-racial ideas and program racist. And if they yell loud enough to say that these things that are not racist are racist, there's a certain amount of people that will believe them. And that's what they're doing. So they're actually doing racial things because they're racist and portraying other things as being racist. In fact, I see that they're attacking the National African American Museum that was put in place when a Republican George Bush was president. So it's shameful what they're doing. And unfortunately, a certain amount of people are allowed to do it and they're getting away with it. At the same time, when you speak of criminality, look what happened this week. At 9:37 on Tuesday, the current president posted on Truth social media, this is a great time to buy stock, right? So, in other words, if you part of his process, you listen to what he's saying, you go ahead and buy stocks. If you would have taken that advice and invested in the typical market, which the company that they've been talking about, your stock portfolio in that one day would have grown by between 15 to 25%. See, because he made the post at 9:37, at 1:40, the White House announced a 90-day pause on tariffs. The stock market went crazy. And at 2:26 that day, Margot Martin posted a video on Twitter of Trump saying to Charles Schwab had made $2.5 billion profit that one day based on the change in direction of the tariff program. And nobody's going to jail.
You feel
Well, we call that
manipulated by
garden. Is that Milton?
Yes.
Excuse me. Good morning, everyone. Do you feel manipulated by that thing?
Well, actually, I'm ashamed to say, but I saw the news, and so I would invest in the stock market and made a substantial profit.
Well, after the call, after our show on last week, when the market, just melted down substantially, and so many American citizens lost a tremendous amount of money in their 401k accounts. If one was an investor, it really didn't take a rocket scientist to understand that when stocks are low, that's the time to invest. So even before he announced the 90-day stay, those who are invested may have had that thought process, right? But when he made the announcement, now is the time to invest. Time will tell. I'm interested in whether members of Congress, what happened with respect to their investments following the announcement. But from my perspective, it's fundamentally insider trading. I've never seen this in the history
I mean, how
of
much
the
more
country.
does he have to do? to
I'm
show
sorry,
us who he
Milton.
really is? I'm
I
sorry.
didn't hear you, Milton.
I said, how much more does he have to do to show us who he really is?
Oh, no more. Please, no more.
No more.
And back to Attorney Lee's point, this is an old playbook, right? You stack the courts, you demonize the press, you dehumanize your opponents, you seek the kind of retribution that he is seeking from his opponents. You ban books authored by Maya Angelou, but you allow books by Adolf Hitler.
And you withdraw and take down awards and recognitions of people that have done a lot for this country just because of the color of their skin.
The parks, absolutely, Attorney Grimes, and you take down from the Service the history of the Underground Railroad until there's an outcry and you have to place it back, right?
Right, right.
Well, this is kind of part and parcel of this legislation that has gone all across the country, starting in Florida, demonizing DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's so loose, it's
Right.
so vague that it's really, subject to many interpretations. And as a result of these laws around the country, you see books like, Ruby Bridges, being banned, who, help integrate, one of our, major school systems. And, we're seeing that across the country. Now, what's really problematic for me is that now we're seeing this whole DEI initiative, spread across the country and now through this administration. But the thing that I think is really important is that they're really putting it in the hands of J.D. Vance, who last I checked was not a historian, to look at Smithsonian to see if it's accurate. And that's just improper. And so I think, what we need to do in terms of solutions is not only continue to push back and let them know that our history is not going to be destroyed or diminished in any way. But I do like, what many African American churches did in Florida in response to, Governor DeSantis and his, Stop Woke Act. They started collecting history. They started doing Black History Month programs and Black History Month lessons throughout their local churches. And that's something that we need to look at as well. But, it's sacrosanct, our history. There are people that fought and died to get us where we're at. And we really got to fight hard on both fronts, not only speaking out, but also, taking the steps that, many of the churches took in Florida to make sure that our history is never forgotten.
Well, the opposite also happened with the tariffs. China responded by raising U.S. import tariffs to 125%, and they called the Trump policies a joke. And so China is matching these tariffs, and well, who's going to pay that? Well, the people that shopped at Walmart. As early as 2003, Walmart was importing $1 billion a week in goods from China. And folks, here's how they make the money. They pay 10 cents for something, they sell for $1. And so they were making substantial profits off these Chinese products. And also, one of the things that the corollary to this is that they were saying that by having tariffs, restricting the access of products in America, we have more American jobs. Well, there was an economist that gave a really detailed analysis. I don't know whether or not you saw this, but essentially, the economy was showing one company like Apple. They make these cell phones in China, and so they cut off the ability. But the problem is that they have high-paying technology jobs in America based upon the phones that are being made in China. He was saying that if you were to transfer productions of iPhones to the United States, instead of paying that $1,600, you'll be paying about $4,000 for the same phone. I said, wow, that's pretty dramatic. And so I think it's important that people understand that when you impose tariff, and we had the economist last week, Dr. Rooney talked about this, the tariff, folks, didn't result in any bump in the national economy. There was a debate as to whether or not tariffs caused the Great Depression of 1929, but everybody agreed that the tariff extended the Great Depression. So, having said that, tariff is a tax on American citizens. And so, when you hear this stuff on TV, tariffs, you're paying the tax. Now, why they're doing these tariffs, what the ideology about it? Well, we saw it in the budget this week, folks. In the budget, the idea is to give billionaires and multimillionaires tax breaks. So in order to cover this massive tax break for really wealthy, not rich people, but wealthy folks, you need to put a greater burden of taxation on poor folks. That's right. So if your income is in the bottom half of America, your involvement in the system going to be far greater in terms of the expense of funding this massive tax bill. I saw that they're trying to do things such as Medicaid and things like that. Well, in our state, there's just millions of people that use Medicaid. And so the point is that be very careful when you listen to this news about tariffs. They're talking about you, folks. You're the one that's going to foot the bill. But in addition to tariffs, we have these crazy issues like the Social Security Administration. That part, I don't understand why they attack on the Social Security Administration. That makes no sense to me. I understand that they want to reduce the amount of payments made, but to go in and just start terminating people, and that's a red herring to me. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Well, it's certainly problematic. I think that people rely upon this, for their retirement. As the economist talked last week, the whole idea is to have three different streams as it relates to the retirement income, and Social Security is a big part of that, as well as 401ks. And so, a lot of people depend upon this. So it's not something that, we need to mess with. Individuals have paid into this system, for decades. And, part of that great promise is that, you fulfill your end of the bargain, you work in good faith, you work the requisite number of quarters, and when it's time for you to retire, that money's going to exist. And so it's something that, decades of Americans have depended upon. It's something that we need to make sure that we have confidence in. I think one of the reasons why they're doing this is they're trying to use that data to fulfill a campaign promise to deport more individuals. And it's really problematic in the sense that, hey, this is the most secure and confidential information, and you're giving it over to people that may not have security clearance, may not have the proper vetting. If they're just part of this, Doge team that the administration created, as opposed to individuals that have a right to know, they have the proper security clearance, proper training, it certainly raises a lot of different issues.
The United States government and the executive agencies, they are not plagued by this fraud and abuse that's being asserted by the administration. Again, you start with a false premise and you build on that false premise. And so the Social Security Administration, the Internal Revenue Service, we saw a leader in the Internal Revenue Service, a chief there, stepped down because of the request for confidential private information to be used, back to your point, Attorney Primes, to identify and deport, quote, illegal immigrants. But we are seeing agency after agency being gutted, right? The prior administration, one of the mantras was that the role of the federal government is to help and support people. So you saw, for example, in the aftermath of natural catastrophes, wildfires, floods, weather-related catastrophes across the country, the federal government, through FEMA and other entities, deploy resources to those communities. Just one example of how the federal government supports local communities. But when you gut those agencies under the guise of fraud and waste, and you fire again illegally um, civil servant, independent employees across those agencies, you in fact gut the infrastructure of these agencies and the federal government to perform its job, right? Which is to support people across
Well,
our nation who have paid taxes to the government. And so it's outrageous for me to hear that monies are being held, millions of dollars across the country from universities and agencies that are performing critical services on behalf of the people. And we're seeing it show up, in neighborhoods across the country. So, with respect to the Social Security Administration specifically, so you lay off employees, you render the agency unable to perform its essential services. You say that people have to come into offices to prove their identity, and that means that disabled citizens that have earned their Social Security benefits and seniors, they can't go to a local office because those are being closed, right? They are experiencing significant wait times. This is all part of a concerted effort to demonstrate that government doesn't work.
Hey, counsel, there's something a little bit more sinister going on here with Social Security. Let me explain what I mean. Back in the 80s, I did Social Security cases. And back then, I could typically resolve a case from the beginning to a trial in about 6 months. In the 90s, the time was extended out. And then COVID hit, and then a record number of people applied. And so the process took a lot longer. With this new process, instead of taking a year or 2 years, it'll probably take over 2 years from start to a trial in Social Security with this backlog and laying people off. And so what happens to sick people that apply for disability a lot of time? There's a certain percentage that die. So statistically speaking, there's so many people die every day in America. If you're already sick and disabled, people apply for Social Security. So depending on the nature and extent of illness, statistically speaking, that person may have a higher probability of death. Well, if you delay the process by getting rid of half the staff for a whole year, you have more people unable to collect benefits. So when I thought about this, I was thinking this is really pretty cynical what they're doing by laying these folks off. Mathematically, they're going to pay out less money in benefits by delaying the process. It's not just the staff loss, but it's the needy Americans that need their check won't be able to get it.
well, it's obviously he and Musk are enacting and enforcing Project 2025 ideas that originated back in 1970 on the Lewis Powell plan that he wrote. And so they're going after poor folks. They're going after poor whites and blacks, and they're going after minorities. They're eliminating them from benefiting any whatsoever from the government. I guess that we've contributed to the government. Now we are kicked out because we're not owed anything. So what do we do about that?
Back to solutions, after there was a public outcry regarding the cuts to the Social Security Administration phone service, that particular action was called back. And so that's why when we hear these things, listening audience, we have to say no. And let's just get these law firms back in the conversation today.
Right.
If there was anyone that was able to advocate that these executive orders are unconstitutional, it was the major law firms in this nation. And, you know, we talked about and can continue to have the conversation regarding the law firms, some of which folded before even an executive order was issued. Of course, they maintained that they would have been targeted. But it's very troublesome when lawyers who are bound by ethical standards don't all come together and unite against these unconstitutional orders. And they agree to pay millions of dollars to support an administration's policies. It's just very, very troublesome.
Yeah,
Vanita, people
go
ask me, used to ask me, they still do, what do you do? You go to court and you try civil rights cases? I said, yes, but my job is to police the police. And I think that's what law firms are about. They got to make sure that people receive their rights and their benefits. And when you slide away and become a coward, I don't know what we're going to do if law firms do not stand behind the people.
Yeah, President Obama, former President Obama, really spoke to this issue, and he, made the point that, hey, had he during his administration, had an executive order against individuals or law firms that opposed his policies, such as the Affordable Care Act or other legislation, there would have just been a great human outcry. And so I think we really need to drill down in terms of just the absurdity of what has been done. We have a president of the United States that has an executive order singling out individuals and individual law firms saying, you cannot go to a federal courthouse. You cannot get federal contracts. I mean, so there have been a number of bar associations that have spoke out about that, but I think there needs to be more collective outrage, because not only is this, damaging in terms of law firms, it's damaging for our, system of democracy. The other thing that's really troublesome is that there are a number of law firms that have fought back and have gotten temporary, relief from federal courts. And I think we should applaud those firms that have done so. But then there are a group of law firms that have cut deals, even though there is existing case law out there saying that what the president has done is wrong. So in terms of solutions, as Attorney Banks has correctly indicated, one of the things we need to really look at is that a number of people of color are in positions of authority, whether they work at general counsel's office, whether they're in state or local government. Hey, they should take note of which law firms are making these deals and make a determination as to who is going to be representing these large, diverse entities. Whether it be, a corporation, whether it be a city or, a county. I mean, those are things that we can do to let people know this is, not right, and it's a danger to our democracy.
And law firms
I don't know.
Go ahead, Attorney Grimes.
I don't know the numbers of the law firms that are backed off of the cases of people who've been done wrong by corporate America or by the government. But there are some. So yes, some of them may have raised up a little bit, but I don't know how many this has affected. But I do know what he has done has affected a lot of law firms. That's what I read anyway. So
Well, the
I don't
large,
know what the,
go ahead,
go
Attorney
ahead.
Grimes, I'm sorry.
No, please.
Well, the law firms, to Attorney Prime's point, that have stood firm and filed lawsuits against these unconstitutional executive orders have all received temporary restraining orders from the courts.
The,
Go ahead, Attorney Grimes.
the funny thing about that, when you said that, it reminded me that back in the 70s and 60s, when they would arrest the protest leaders, now you got the protest leaders fighting for themselves because they are now accused of this or accused of that, which put a stop to the protest. So here you got the law firms now fighting for themselves as opposed to the people that they're supposed to be representing.
That's
Old trick.
absolutely right. And I just hate to say that the rule of law is being thrown, out of the window. That's what differentiates us from other countries, and our democracy is the rule of law. And so these law firms know that these are unconstitutional orders. And if anyone should be fighting, it should be the lawyers. And so, what are they saying? That they're going to agree, to your point, Attorney Grimes, that they're not going to take on any clients or causes that are opposed to the current administration, and to capitulate to unconstitutional, and I just have to keep saying it, listening audience, these executive orders are unconstitutional. They are illegal. How can you tell someone, a lawyer, that they cannot enter a federal building to represent their clients? Think how absurd that is. For example, a lawyer from some of these targeted firms, they can't go to the post office. There are lots of callers, I believe, Attorney Lee.
Yeah, I don't know how to admit them.
Yeah, what's also problematic, just briefly, about that is that the administration has sent letters to the law firms saying, do you have any illegal DEI programs in the view of the administration? Now, as many of us know that on this panel, is that law firms are among the most least diverse entities in our society, especially when you get into the partner and equity partner level. So, I mean, this is sending a message to these, other firms that, hey, this is not important, and anything that you do to make sure that our society is equal, that you have a group of attorneys that are diverse, that represent a wide variety of perspectives, that's something that's not going to be welcome. So that's going to really take us, substantially backwards as well.
And we all know that we need diversity as much as possible in these firms so that they can help poor people and minority people, because if you don't have your representation in those firms will not even think about you.
Well, unfortunately, in most of these firms, the African-American representation is like 1%. And unfortunately, the legal profession is probably one of the most segregated professions to start with. If truth be known, our experience in Indiana is not unique to America. Our law firms, we started the process of desegregating law firms in Indiana in 1987. There were only 4 Black lawyers in majority firm that year. And so we started a process to try to increase the numbers of Black lawyers at white law firms. Very simple. And even today, when I look around in terms of firm, there's very minimal amount of Black lawyers at majority firms. And so even without these executive orders, the law firm don't show significant progress during the last century anyway.
Over
And so,
my career, that is so true as well, Attorney Lee, not only in law firms, but in corporate law departments across this nation. And as you state, the practice of law is one of the least diverse professions. And so some of these diversity initiatives were intended to address that issue. And of course, we know that quotas were always illegal. We saw that back in the 70s through the Bakke decision, Attorney Grimes, out in California. But to Attorney Prime's point, looking at attorneys who are qualified, right? Who, after going to law school, graduating, and passing the bar, looking at attorneys from different geographic territories, from different socioeconomic status, women. Diversity is a strength that should be celebrated and leveraged. And I just want to share very quickly the preamble of the Model Rules of Professional Conduct state that a lawyer should further the public's understanding of and confidence in the rule of law and the justice system, because legal institutions in a constitutional democracy depend on popular participation and support to maintain their authority. And so lawyers, we have a fundamental obligation to protect our democracy.
yeah. Well, moving forward, one of the other issues that become relevant is the number of civil servant firing. In one of the cases, the Dellinger versus Bessick case was the first legal challenge that the administration appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. In that appeal, the Supreme Court initially issued a preliminary ruling siding against the administration. The case was later dismissed with a ruling that the president was within his rights to fire the officials. In another case, a federal judge temporarily halted the dismantling of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the independent agency created after the 2008 financial crisis. So we're seeing some changes in our society in terms of how the court view these. But we have a call on the line. Call, you have a question or comment for us today?
Hi, good morning. I just wanted to say thank you again for the show. There's just a lot to talk about, and I'm so glad that you guys can parse it down to where we can understand who are not lawyers. I wanted to ask a question. What do you think about, have you heard anything about the Black law firms that if anything different is happening with them as opposed to the majority white law firms? I'm thinking, of course, of Attorney Crump and, a few others. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that. And then I also want to say, since we talk about legal issues, and that Alvin Bragg is up for re-election. So I wanted to put out there that we need to get him re-elected in New York City. Thank you.
Well, to answer your first question, Renee, very simple. These litigations, the law firms probably represent 99.9% of these major corporations. So in our state, for example, there are no Black law firms that represent the major corporation in any high statistical number. So, and you see that across the country. And the reason being, these legal relationships don't start like today or tomorrow. They're in existence for decades. And so the same corporate people hire the same law firm year after year. And so the reason this is important, I don't know of personally know of any of the Black lawyers involved in these Trump litigation. There may have been, but I didn't see any. And so to answer your question, how does it affect? Well, not at all. I mean, in terms of the trial process, jury verdicts statistically are getting higher. And it has a lot to do with different factors. One, jurors are highly educated, more educated, but number two, inflation. There's a lot of factors. And then over the years, we in the legal profession have fought hard to get more diversity in terms of the jury pool. And then the fourth thing, of course, more minorities are now showing up for jury service than before. So in a nutshell, there's not been a radical change in terms of how we are doing things in the typical civil litigation cycle. There's less opportunity to do civil rights litigation, I think, because of the rules that have been impacted by the Supreme Court. I think that you have to look at that because it looked like there's been more protectionist in terms of employers against race-based discrimination. And what were you going to say? I missed something, Milton. I'm sorry.
No, I wasn't just listening.
I think a lot of these law firms, Renee asked why, are they quiet and that we're not seeing a lot in the press. I think that people are trying to fly below the radar screen to avoid being targeted in these situations. I wanted to know from Renee how the mayor's race is going and how is former Governor Cuomo doing in this race at this time? Is there a front runner?
Yeah, there's, thank you for the question. Right now, it's just, everybody is just getting by, skirting by. Cuomo is where Cuomo's at. There is one other, and I think I posted a couple of weeks ago, there's one other.
Is he leading the local race projection now, or is he in second place?
I don't know. I haven't heard much. I mean, to be honest, here living in New York City, the national news has just completely gutted the local mayoral race here. So I don't know. I think there are two people in the running that I know so far, but as far as anything else, I haven't been hearing much on the ground about that race.
Wow.
Which is strange. Yeah, it's absolutely strange. I actually have to go dig in order to find out anything about it. And I haven't looked lately because I've been busy with all the other stuff. But I will do a little more.
This week, though, Eric Adams say, the hell with the Democratic Party. He's going to run as independent. He said, I can't win as a Democrat, so maybe I got a shot as an independent.
Yeah, he also thought he was going to run as a Republican. He's going to lose either way. So it's just a matter of who's going to take votes from, in the Democratic Party. I'm not sure if it's going to be Cuomo or the other guy. I can't think of his name right now, who's leading at he's not leading. He's up there with Cuomo. So I don't know. This is a tough race, and most New Yorkers don't really make up their minds until like a few weeks before. They start doing their research, and they're like, okay, I'm just going to go vote, and I don't like what this person did or that person did, and I can't see this person in office. So, but it's been under the radar. It's strange. I just have not seen a whole lot.
And Renee, except for those big law firms that we've been seeing in the press, we saw Paul Weiss. They were one of the initial targets, and they capitulated early, deciding to pay $40 million to support the administration's priorities. And then we saw Perkins Coie stand up and fight. We did see 500 law firms, some of the bigger law firms glaringly missing, but we did see 500 law firms file an amicus brief this week declaring that the executive orders targeting law firms are unconstitutional We also saw um, over or close to 350 judges filing an amicus brief supporting Perkins Coie, one of the big law firms that have stood up to fight against these flagrant attacks on the rule of law in our democracy.
Thank you for that. That's
Hello?
encouraging, and I'm gonna hang up.
Okay, thank you. Hey, producer, we have another
Hello?
call. Go ahead. What's your question coming for us today, sir?
This is Guy calling. Good program. As you probably have heard, some folks have trouble calling in because of telephone, but I'm glad to get on today. I just wondered, we can continue to discuss what I consider to be tyranny by the present executive in the presidency, and I just wonder how long it's going to take for people to deal with this in a realistic way. Because if you look at the playbook of Adolf Hitler, for instance, in Germany, Germany was a democracy before he came to power. So they're basically are modeling what Hitler did in his ascendancy in this country. So one point of good news, I guess, former mayor of Indianapolis, Mayor Ballard, you may remember, who was a big Republican. I saw him on TV the other day, and he was decrying the antics of the present administration at the federal level. So maybe that's a good sign. But I think we've got to bring all these people that are dissatisfied or discuss it together and quickly, because they are moving so fast with their tyrannical activities. What do you think about that?
Your guess is as good as any as to when that's going to be effective. So far, it looks like Trump is filling his pockets every day. So I can't say.
Exactly right.
Another issue.
And this is a.
Go ahead, Guy.
Go ahead. No, I was just going to say, this is not just in America, this is globally, because you've got similar people like in Hungary, Viktor Orban, who is the prime minister of Hungary. They're using the same tactics to be so-called right-wingers, trying to get the people stirred up while they're taking money. It's sort of like when a person of color goes into a jewelry store, and that person is watched pretty carefully, while some of the other customers that are not of color can get away with all they can get away with.
I think you're absolutely right. They are following a playbook, especially Viktor Orban, and they have not been shy about it. In fact, the American Conservative Union had a meeting in Hungary and made no bones about the fact that they wanted us to move in that direction. Now, what Viktor Orban did is that first he put a lot of pressure on the universities, as we're seeing in this administration. Then there were some changes to voting. They moved from a democracy to where they're at now. And Viktor Orban is a strong man by many accounts. From commentators around the world will tell you that. So we have to be careful, because democracies are fragile, and they can move to authoritative governments if you're not careful.
And
It's like his
Absolutely.
it's like his insider trader remark this past week, where he said this is the time to buy stocks or sell stocks, The people who benefited from that, and I'm not including you, Nate, people who benefited from that are going to be kind of hard to go against him now. I'm sure he got some people with that move.
now again, Nate was talking about buying low before these statements were made.
Okay,
just because of
I
his
know it makes-
sophistication, just because of his sophistication as an investor. And so I testify on his behalf on any assertions that are made regarding his investments. And I want to move to all of the
You don't
students
have to defend
here.
it to me.
Go ahead.
Vanita. I know what makes heart is.
I know you're joking.
A lot of people's heart.
I know
A
you're
lot of
joking.
people's heart is in their pocket.
I know you're joking about Attorney Lee, and I'm glad you referenced, there was a reference to all the students and the attacks on universities. There are over 500 students who received, these cryptic emails that their student visas had been revoked, crossing colleges in Indiana. Nathaniel, Purdue University, Indiana University, here in Illinois, the same thing is happening. Huge sums, multi-million dollars of federal funding is being seized from these universities. And my question is, who's researching these actions to say, okay, once I have a federal contract, apparently, and I understand contracts. Apparently, in these FARs is what they call them. That's the acronym for federal government GovCon contracts. Apparently, there is a no cause termination provision, Attorney Lee and Grimes and Primes, which enables the federal government to cancel these contracts for any reason and no reason at all, right? Because once you've entered into a contract, you should be governed by the terms of the agreement. So I'm sure they're canceling these contracts pursuant to a quote, no cause termination provision. But we've got to be looking at what are the legal arguments in response to these actions.
Well, I'm not changing the subject, and I can't answer your question, Vanita, but included in all this, didn't the judge just say that the U.S. can deport that young man from Columbia University?
Yeah, the judge did say that, but that's an administrative law judge that is part of the immigration judge is part of the United States Department of Justice. There's also a similar case pending regarding that same defendant in New Jersey, saying that, hey, it's retaliation for exercising his First Amendment rights. So we'll have to see how that progresses. Yeah,
my point is that it's been publicized to that effect that the judge says, yeah, you can deport him. Can you imagine the chilling effect that have on people, even people who are nationalized citizens or who have their citizenships? They're concerned that will be taken away if the government does not like you.
Wow.
That's exactly right, Attorney Lee. Attorney Grimes.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to continue this discussion next week. We're out of time. But before we close out today, don't forget, everyone, make sure if you haven't done your tax return, file your extension on Monday. Tax returns are due, I think, on Tuesday. If you're not a billionaire, like an ordinary person, you probably need to be filing your tax return on time to avoid penalties. So make sure you do that, folks. And so thank you, my superstar panel, and all the guests. And I'm sorry for the lack of connection, but we're trying to work on the technical stuff again this week so you can call in next week. Until then, take care, everyone. We'll talk to you next Saturday.
Bye-bye.
Everybody have a great weekend.
Okay, bye-bye.
Y'all too. Bye.